Namaste and welcome to Flutter Appwrite series. In this series, we are building a time tracking application from scratch using Flutter and Appwrite. In the last episode, we set up login for our users using their email and password. We left a pull request open. With this success, you can see that our analyzer has run successfully without any errors. We are now able to merge this pull request. So let us merge this. Let's get back to our code. Here I have already switched to main branch, and as you can see, we have two changes in remote that we need to pull. You can simply click this button here, or you can also click this pull button here which says sync changes, or you can also do from terminal git pull origin main. This will pull all the changes. Next, let's create a new branch. Let's call this authentication state. So in this episode, we are going to work on managing our authentication state using riverpod. Let us get started. First, I'd like to add few new features into our Appwrite class so that it will help us manage our authentication state. We already have create account and create email session. Now, in order for us to allow user to log out, I'd like to add a function called logout. For logout, we need to call a delete session method in Appwrite SDK. So logging out is just deleting a session. So here we can call final. We don't need to get anything in return. Await account dot delete session, and delete session needs a session ID that we got back from here. However, to delete a currently active session, we can just pass current as the session ID. And if it's success, let's make it bool so that when it's success we can return true, and when it fails we can return false. We have our logout function. Next, in order to check whether or not the user is already logged in, we can try to get the user's account. If we are successful in getting the user account, then the user is logged in. If not, user is not logged in. So let me copy this method, the create account method, and then paste it, and instead call this get account, and instead of calling create, this will not need any parameter. Here we'll just call get, which also doesn't need any parameters, and if successful we return user, if not we return null. We have added two functions. Next, I'll bring in the auth state and we'll see how it is made. Here I have brought in auth notifier folder. In here I have auth notifier which exports our auth notifier, as well as we need to export the user model. And if we look into source, we have three files: auth notifier, auth state, and user. Let's start with our user model. User model simply has ID, name, and email for now. We can add more values later because Appwrite provides us more details for users, but for now this is all we need. Then we have auth state. The state holds three things: user, which can be null, status, auth status, which is a enum which can have one of the values loading, authenticating, authenticated, or unauthenticated. And then we have a copy with method that will allow us to update our state. Finally, we have our auth notifier, which uses both the user modal as well as auth state. So auth notifier is a state notifier which comes from package state notifier, which is also a part of riverpod. If you see here, we are importing riverpod. And auth notifier's state is of type auth state, which is the class we defined here. And initially the auth state only has a status which is loading, and user and error values are null. Next, we also get our Appwrite instance from getIt, which is for ours, which is also a authentication provider for managing authentication. And finally, we create a state notifier provider which is of type auth notifier auth state, which is already defined by us, and it returns a new instance initially of the auth notifier. Next, we have an authenticate function that will check whether or not user is authenticated, for which it will try to get a user account, and if it is successful, it will update the state with the user, error null, and status authenticated. Otherwise, status will be unauthenticated and error messages will be added. However, if we go back to our appwrite.dart, you can see that we are already handling the error here, and instead we are just debug printing the error message and returning null. So instead of doing this, what we can do is we can throw the error again, or we can simply use rethrow. This will throw the error down so that we can catch it again. We'll do the same thing here. Rethrow, 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 and this can be user instead of nullable user. This can also be session. We have updated Appwrite, and here now this should work as expected, and we should get the error message when there is an error. Similarly, we have also a logout function that will again call logout method from Appwrite, and here again it will catch the error and update the state. Same for login. It will call the create email session, and then it will update the state by calling authenticate. Finally, sign up. Again, it will call create account and also call login, so that whenever a new user signs up, they are automatically logged in. Okay, so we now have our auth provider setup using riverpod, which has our authentication state. Next, we need to use it in our application. First, let's try it in the router. So we have set up router using provider so that we could use different application states in our routing logic as well. For that, if we want to use authentication state in our routing logic, here we can do let's call auth state and watch auth provider. Next, We also need a notifier because we need login function from auth state. We'll also watch notifier. Next, what we can do is we can check the authentication state here. Let's do that in a bit. First, let's use the sign up method from auth notifier instead of this. Let's remove this debug print. Anything. Here we'll do auth state dot auth notifier dot sign up. Next, here as well we'll do auth notifier dot login. Await. Okay. Next, we have our auth state. We can check auth state dot status equals auth status dot authenticated. If it is authenticated, then we show root route should show something else. Let's make a dashboard page. For now, I'll simply return a stateful vz, stateless vz, which will return scaffold body center dashboard. Here. So we have our dashboard widget. So whenever user is authenticated, we simply return dashboard. Otherwise, we return home page. Let's save. Let's remove whatever is not used from here. So we have our authentication state in our routing logic, and we show different pages based on this. Let's run our project. We logged in the last episode, so we should be redirected to the dashboard page by checking the authentication state. As you can see, we redirect successfully to the dashboard page. We can see it in action also. If we do hot restart, we should see the home page initially and then redirected to the dashboard page. Now in the dashboard, for now, I simply like to add a logout button that will log us out so that we can see the home page again. So let us go to our dashboard page. Here, let me wrap this with a column. Main axis size minimum so that it's always centered, and here elevated button on pressed, child text logout. What's the error? Invalid constant. Okay, I see. No constant here, constant here, constant here, and here we need to add a logout method. But for that, we need to consume our authentication notifier. So like before, while consuming routing, we can do the same thing. Wrap this with a builder. This should be consumer that comes from Flutter riverpod, which will give us context, reference, and widget. context ref vz, and inside we need to auth provider dot notifier, and here we can call auth notifier dot logout, make this async, and await, save. Now we can tap this, we should be redirected back to our home page. Let's update the home page a bit. Here again, let's center this by adding main axis size min and certain height. So let's try to log in again. Let's use our email. Tap on login. We should see the login happen. Let us commit our changes. For that, I will make commits in stages. For example, the dashboard dot. I can simply commit this as dashboard page. Next, Appwrite dot. I can commit this account related methods. I can commit everything related to authentication state as authentication state provider. Finally, home page simply as UI updates, and in router use auth state provider. Next, Dart analyzer also locally analyzes our code and shows us if there are any problems. You can see that here in these panels there is a problems panel, and here we can see we have one unnecessary null value check. Let's remove this. Fix analyzer reports, and finally let's sync our changes. Let's go back to our repository and to our code. We can again see new changes. Let's create a pull request. Authentication state manager, create a pull request, check the changes. We have added get account, create account. We have updated these methods with rethrow, and then we have also added logout method. And then we have added bunch of auth notifier files. Then we have added dashboard wizard, and finally updated homepage wizard and router. This looks good. We can go back to conversation. We can see that analyzer is still analyzing, so we can merge it in the next episode. This is all for today's episode. In this episode, we learned to set up authentication state, and then we also learned how to consume the authentication state both using riverpod and then update our router to use authentication notifier and authentication state to show different UI to the user based on the state, as well as use the auth notifier to actually log in, sign up user, so that our UI is not directly dependent on Appwrite from now on. Our UI is dependent on authentication state, and only authentication state depends on Appwrite. so that later, even if you want to change Appwrite and use some other backend, your own backend or some other authentication providers, you can easily do so by simply changing the auth state and auth notifiers. You don't have to make changes everywhere in your application. This is all for today's episode. I hope this video was helpful. Don't forget to share your comments so that we can improve our videos. Thank you. See you again in the next episode.